My shortest buyer agreement ever, signed and terminated in just 48 hours. If you've ever struggled to say no, stand firm on your value, or feel guilty about setting boundaries, this one's for you. Are you tired of feeling like you're doing all the things as a real estate agent but still not seeing consistent results? Well, that ends right now. Welcome to the Profitable Real Estate Agent, the show for agents who are ready to stop winging it and start building a profitable and sustainable business. This season, we're going to cut through the noise and focus on exactly what it takes to make $100K as a real estate agent, without the guesswork, without the overwhelm, and without wasting time on things that don't move the needle in your business. I'm pulling back the curtain on the exact framework that took me from my first 100K to 500K to building a 7-figure business. So if you haven't hit 100K yet, or you struggle with inconsistency, don't worry, I've got you covered. It's time to take action. Let's get to work. Today, I want to share something that happened recently, and honestly, if this same situation had happened to me about 5 or 6 years ago, my response would have been very different. See, for a long time, I was constantly worried about rejection, about what people thought of me. I avoided saying no, even when I should have. I went out of my way to please everyone I met, even when it wasn't healthy. I honestly let clients walk all over me. But what I realized is when you try to please everyone, you're not protecting your time or your energy. I mean, I'll never forget the time when a client came into my office and literally berated me in front of my peers, and I just stood there and was dumbfounded and took it. And it wasn't even anything I did. We were under contract and the buyers wanted a 3-day extension to close. And unfortunately, I became the closest punching bag. I've had plenty of moments like this, not all as vivid, of course, but situations where I took the heat for things that weren't my fault because I didn't know how to handle them. And yes, I've made mistakes and I've owned up to every single one of them and handled them professionally. But sometimes when a client fires you or walks away, this could actually end up being the greatest gift. So here's my story of my 48-hour buyer agreement. And maybe you'll see yourself in this story, or maybe you'll remember it for the next time. Maybe something similar comes up for you. So a past client of ours called us. They were moving back to Florida. And now we've already done 4 transactions with this family. So when they reached out, of course, we jumped into action. Now, the only difference this time was when they bought with us before, buyer agencies weren't required. See, in Florida, they were optional until, of course, the recent NAR changes. So during our buyer consultation, when we transitioned in the compensation conversation, I explained how it all works. Of course, they were a little unsettled at first, but understandably, it's a shift for them. But I explained it just like I do with every other client, whether I've done transactions with them or not. And because they worked with us before, they understood our value. That was clear. And they signed the agreement. They already had identified a property that they were interested in, and we made an appointment and got in very quickly. But when we asked how much the compensation the seller was offering, there was a gap between what we had outlined in our agreement and what the seller was paying. And of course, we had gone over this in detail at the consultation, so they were aware of all the different scenarios and that this was a possibility. Hey, a real quick pause before we go deeper. If you're listening right now and thinking, I want a clear plan to finally reach 100K, then check out my signature program. It's my step-by-step framework for real estate agents who are ready to stop winging it and start building real results. Inside, you're going to learn the exact fundamentals to build the foundation to hitting 100K. We're going to cover everything from mastering your buyer and seller consultations to building your database and delivering a 5-star client experience and everything in between. You're going to get access to my scripts, templates, and checklists. Plus, we're going to have coaching, accountability, and support so you never feel alone. Click on the link in the show notes now to join the roadmap to 100K. All right, let's take you back to the episode. The client immediately got upset about the gap between what the seller was offering and what we had agreed to in our buyer agreement. And he told us that we needed to change our agreement to match what the seller was offering. I calmly revisited the conversation we had during the buyer consultation and reminded him that we had discussed this scenario exactly. I suggested that we negotiate the gap in the offer, which, by the way, as we know, is completely normal and something we had done successfully for our buyers. But he refused to put anything in writing at this point, so we went back and forth verbally with the listing agent, trying to work it out.
Now, the seller did agree to contribute a little bit more toward our fee, but there was still this small gap left over. This is when things really escalated. The buyer continued to refuse to pay the difference, even brought in his daughter-in-law, who is an agent in another state, trying to pressure us to reduce our fee. But we held our ground, and I said no. And honestly, in that moment, I was so proud of myself. I couldn't believe that had even come out of my mouth. It just came out so naturally. But the tone shifted even further. Not on our end, but the conversation started to feel very belittling and disrespectful. So that night, my husband and I talked it over, and we both agreed we were done. We called the next morning and said we're going to draft the release. We sent it over to him and let him know that we were terminating the agreement so they could freely work with another agent. When it was all signed, I felt such a huge sigh of relief. I knew this was the right decision. Now, going back to what I said earlier, 5 or 6 years ago, I would have handled this completely different. I probably would have discounted my fee, apologized for something that wasn't my fault, and then carried this emotional weight for weeks. But this time, I stood firm. I walked away with my integrity and boundaries intact. I felt guilt-free. And this, my friends, is a freeing feeling. So here's what I want you to walk away with. Trust your process. If you've explained your fee and value up front, and that person continues to push back after, especially in a disrespectful way, it does not mean that you necessarily did something wrong. It could just mean that the person is not in alignment with you or your business. And look, this is completely okay. You don't need to re-explain your value every single time unless you decide after self-reflection, which is important for all of us to do. We need to look internally and say, okay, did I do something wrong? Could I have explained something better? If you missed something, then maybe you can revisit it. Now, if you still feel this tension and frustration or like you're being disrespected, sometimes, actually most times, the most professional thing you can do is walk away from the client or give the client space to do the same. Now, this business will test your boundaries constantly. And sometimes the biggest growth doesn't come from more closings. It comes from saying no to the wrong ones. You don't have to work with everyone. You don't have to say yes. Yes, provide great service. Yes, be professional. But remember, clear boundaries are part of an amazing, exceptional service. Because when you're constantly over-giving, over-apologize, or bending your rules, this is not sustainable. This is where you're going to burn out. So I want to hear from you. Did this resonate? Or maybe you've experienced something similar. Jump over to my IG, link is in the show notes, hit follow and send me a DM. I'd love to hear your story and support you through it. That's all I've got for today. Bye for now.
Success as a real estate agent comes down to a decision: to show up, take action, and stay committed. So don't just listen. Apply what you learned today and put it into motion. If you need help getting started, I want you to grab my free 60 lead gen strategy guide so you can start finding the right lead gen strategies that'll work for you. And if you're a motivated, ambitious agent who's ready to hit 6 figures, join my Roadmap to 100K program. You'll find both links in the show notes. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with a fellow agent and leave me a 5-star rating and review, as it helps more agents just like you find the show. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next time on The Profitable Real Estate Agent.